Good morning, everyone. Although our attendance is really low right now, it's 8:05 in the morning. But thank you, Kaina, for scheduling and hosting this talk story with our KEMA director, Elton Ushio, and also on the line is Matt Bracken, the county attorney. So, Kaina, turning it over to you. Kaina.
Looks like he's frozen.
Okay.
Your turn, Kaina.
Okay, sorry. I was wondering if I was breaking up or I was losing reception. Okay, so thanks for having us, Karen. I'm Kaina Hall, the planning director. I met with you folks several times in the past, during this COVID-19 time. And of course, a lot of questions continue to arise about, vacation rentals, the real estate industry, 6-month leases, and the various array of rules and regulations that are in play or sometimes constantly changing. So there was some discussion about ultimately having Elton, who's the head of the Kauai Emergency Management Agency, as well as Matt Bracken, who's our county attorney and is rigorously and dutifully reviewing all those rules that essentially get pushed out from the governor's office as well as the mayor's office. So these are kind of really the guys at the forefront of keeping Kauai safe, keeping these numbers extremely low relative to the other parts of the island, or other parts of the state. But we're really just, is my connection not that well?
Oh, you're good.
Okay. But so we're really here to kind of, for Elton, Matt, and as well as myself, but to kind of answer your questions. I'm not sure if Elton might have a few words to say in the beginning, but really just to deep dive into questions that you folks have. And yeah, that's why we're essentially here. So Elton, you have anything to say?
No, not that much actually. Just thank you for putting this together, Kaina and Karen. Yeah, we at KEMA, we become like the central coordinating entity or agency where the whole of government, whole community response to COVID is taking place, at least for Kauai County. We work closely with the governor's office and the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, as well as the Department of Health on a statewide level. But locally, we have representatives from various county departments, our incident management team, the Kauai District Health Office, all working together with whatever partners can contribute to our county's COVID response and coordination. I have Kaina assisting, Matt Bracken, all are part of a team. And in all honesty, it will take 3 of us today to answer all your questions possibly, because it is a huge operation. So.
Okay, so I guess one of the questions that majority of the people want to know is, when are we expecting to get, Kaina's laughing, when are we expecting to get some kind of relief for our businesses and our vacation rental companies, and also the other visitor industries that are on the island?
Okay, so even there, it's somewhat, complex and broad answer that I'll have to give to that. If we're looking at business relief versus specific to visitor industry, we already are getting and implementing a significant amount of CARES Act funding to support local businesses and our citizens in a number of different ways. More specific to real estate, the rules are always changing, or I should say they're in flux, and they are largely driven by the governor's emergency proclamations and what is included in there, and also in part by the mayor's emergency rules that we will issue with governor's concurrence. as a means to supplement or in some cases change what's in the governor's proc if they'll approve it. Specifically to your industry, you'll notice if you go to our COVID website, www.coe.gov/COVID-19, that's our clearinghouse for all of the information COVID related. And there's a bunch of things, but there's a number of mayor's emergency rules and governor's proclamations posted there. You go through those rules, we'll have the latest up there and all the different ones. It's a lot, but that's the best single resource for people to go and look. And if you look at some of those, you'll see that, we've had, like say emergency rules 10, 11, and 12 that all address certain types of allowable business operations and what have you. There's that Rule 14 dealing with TVR rentals to intended residents. That one's kind of like a special rule that they had to implement because some people were trying to get around the statewide TVR, what should I say, limitation or prohibition by doing long-term leases for people only intending to stay for a little while. So we know they had to do a special rule for that. There's this enhanced movement quarantine, which will create these resort bubbles, Rule 16, that'll in part support the visitor industry, lodging accommodations, etc. So, kind of broad area, your question. Ka'aina, you guys have anything you want to add? If not, I can add a little bit more where, the decisions and when the changes take place are largely driven by what we call metrics. Statewide, the metrics have evolved over time, but if they look at case counts, percentage positive, percentage in the hospitals, ICU beds, ventilators, etc., looking at all these different indicators on the health side. But also, we know that health and public safety is top priority, but we also have to look at business, industry, and the economy. So there are considerations on that end as well.
Okay, I have a question on the policies. Okay, if there's a conflict, which one actually rules? Is it the state or the county? If there's a rule that's almost similar in effect, which one takes precedence? I guess Matt is smiling, so he must know the answer to that one.
Yeah, generally if there's any conflict, which there shouldn't be, we try to work out. And because the rules are approved by the state, we try to work those things out in advance. But if there was any conflict, the state proclamation would likely trump, unless there's specific language in the rule saying that, acknowledging that there's a conflict and saying that the rule is overriding the proclamation, which may occur. To date, it hasn't occurred yet. So if there is a conflict, generally the state, unless it says otherwise in the rule, and the rules are signed by the governor too. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add real quick is somebody that gets to kind of watch the team kind of operate, particularly in Matt's purview, is the governor has a proclamation, and sometimes the team will feel that an additional rule is necessary. So Matt will work with the team to make sure it's legally up to snuff. But once that rule is drafted by the team, with really Matt overseeing, kind of making sure the language is all kosher, then Matt runs it through the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office will review it for legality and conformance within the existing governor's rules, and then they'll all sign off together. So there's a huge amount of checks that go on both internally and legally before any rule is signed on the mayor's part.
Okay, thank you on that question. Now, can somebody talk on the resort bubble a little bit? We know of two resorts right now. That's Kukui'ula and Timbers, right? Hukuala, that has been looked at as the so-called resort bubbles. How do you confine people within that area? I mean, other than a dog shock collar.
Okay, so these hotel accommodations who are wanting to be part of that program, they develop a plan and they submit it to us, and they can do a number of different things to that question. One, the most flashy, technologically advanced solution is that they're proposing use of wristbands that sync to your smartphone and provide location tracking. It's an opt-in. If people want to do it, they'll have to wear that bracelet. Technology cannot be tampered with. If you cut it, it'll alert. If it leaves a certain area, it'll alert security. And from there, they will attempt to locate the guests. If they can't locate them, then they'll contact authorities, namely Kauai Police Department. Even without that bracelet or that device, these areas and these operations are supposed to have means to prevent mixing among different classes of visitors. So you have those who are subject to the full 14-day quarantine, who are not supposed to leave their room or their unit. There'll be those participating in the EMQ, Enhanced Movement Quarantine, who can leave their room but stay on property. There will be those who are here not subject to quarantine. There will be those who are here with modified quarantine allowances or exemptions, such as critical infrastructure workers who stay in the hotel and leave for work. So now if you bunch all those people in the same floor or same wing, other than looking at the bracelet, it's very difficult to tell. So some of these properties are coming up with more unique solutions or basic solutions like separating by floor, by wing, by area. You can have certain hours allowable in the pools for the enhanced movement quarantine versus just the general guests. You can have certain dining areas designated for enhanced movement quarantine versus others, or just provide very adequate physical distancing. So there are these various means by which they're tracking and ensuring separation and the ability to differentiate between one type of guest and another.
Okay, our TVR people have been talking about, is there any way that we could have some properties open similar to what you're saying if they came out with a plan and said, hey, we have all these security measures in place? Would that be something that you guys would seriously consider?
So I'm aware of at least one proposal on the table right now from a TVR complex where they're all on a single large property. And we are looking at that. As far as individual properties, we'd consider anything and give it due diligence in review. But in reality, the rationale or the reasoning behind the limitations or prohibitions on TVR operations have been mainly because the ability to monitor and enforce is limited in those situations. So statewide, you might recall the governor initially had added a requirement. I forget what governor's proc, but said, those subject to quarantine must stay in a hotel or motel. Mainly because those types of facilities have a central desk, security, room service, which provides a wraparound that will enable people to quarantine without leaving. And although there's that host responsibility language in governors as well as county rules, whereby the owner operator is responsible in part if the guests break quarantine, hotels and motels really have that ability to monitor much more than a TVR situation in many cases where you might have the owner or the manager offsite. So no one right there all the time. And right now on Kauai, we have over 2,000 people being monitored for compliance by our KPD and National Guard people. As the numbers increase, it'll get harder and harder to do so. And for now, at least, it's easier and it's safer to have people consolidated in hotels or motels. But again, like I said, we have at least one TBR proposal on the table. We'll be taking a closer look at it, and we will give everything due diligence and consideration. Matt or Kaina, anything?
Yeah, basically, we'll just reiterate what Elton was saying is that indeed there is it's at least one, I believe it's 2 specific locations that it has a centralized check-in. They are somewhat managed in a more holistic fashion, the way resorts are, and so we're entertaining those to see if we can fold those into the classification of resort, hotel, motel, and to ensure that the guests can be safely monitored, and should any breaking of quarantine happen, enforced upon. But and also the function of it has to be able to be done within the confines of the governor's emergency proclamation as well. So there are some legal assessments we have to make, whether or not we can legally determine that this functions and is in fact more of a resort hotel, or whether or not it just has to be classified as a vacation rental.
Yeah, I will add, and maybe Matt can chime in if I'm mistaken here, but under the governor's 13th proclamation, let me think. So, yeah, I kind of lost a thought on that one. But there's yeah, Matt, you might have to help me on this one, but there's language that says that as far as the TVR restrictions, it applies to persons subject to quarantine. So under the governor's 13th, and I'm a little hesitant because they made the announcement that there's a 72-hour pre-departure testing program that they're going to put in place. And if you meet that requirement with a negative test, you won't be subject to quarantine. So I believe the governor's language says that the TVR restriction only applies to persons subject to quarantine. So by right, the people are no longer subject to, then there may be an adjustment there. But having said that, I'll tell you right now that the mechanism for identifying, tracking, integration into the state's Safe Travels platform is still being developed. They got a couple weeks to go, but it's still in process. So I can't speak definitively as far as how that tracking will occur and how we will be able to differentiate even at the airport. It's supposed to work on the Safe Travels app. But once here, if persons are not subject to quarantine, my take is that they would be able to stay in a TBR. Don't take that as the green light to go ahead and book, because there are other things in the works, you know, possible adjustments, possible county rules and things that we're doing to adjust to this 13th proclamation.
Okay, I have a question here and for all 3 of you. There are some projects that are outside of the so-called condotel that you guys are talking about, TVR units within the project. So how do you handle those? I mean, some of these real estate agents, and mind you, real estate agents are tied to the DCCA and they are held to violating of the laws and could possibly lose their license as well. So having these units that are in a project, but they are not part of the condotel because they are individually rented, how can they be part of this so-called condotel group? They're individually owned and rented and not part of that hotel group. Somebody can help me here. Lucy, Kahia. Kahia? Marty?
I'm here. Kahair's on as well.
Okay, can someone kind of explain that question to Elton, Kaina, and Matt, where we have a group of condotel, and JP is another one on this call. You have units individually owned, not part of the condotel, and so because of that, they have to come up with a plan as well. How do you address those? Right now, they are illegal because they're not part of the condotel group.
this is Kahea. It sounds to me that it's all the management that's organizing this. So those individually owned owners or those managed by other managers are going to have to come to an agreement with whomever has that front desk set up and cooperate with one another. It seems like whomever has the lease on the front desk at that particular complex has the upper hand. If that's how I'm understanding how these TBR operations for condo hotels are able to get a pass on the resort bubble. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so and I guess to go back to, I think what this is getting at is the one or two that Elton and I were saying were being entertained because they are they're vacation rentals, but because they can be managed like a resort, are being entertained about being let into the list of resorts that you can quarantine at, right? Because again, vacation rentals are free to operate right now, absolutely free to operate. It's just that you can't quarantine in one. And so of course, you know, the vast majority of people aren't going to spend a full 14 days in quarantine at a vacation rental. So whether or not we let some of these operations that have a front desk management system in place is going to depend on ultimately the proposal from the management and how they're going to implement and ensure that their guests are holding to quarantine. If it's an operation that has, you know, a quarter or some number that are independently owned and operated, in order for us to even entertain it, we'll have to have the proposal from the group as a whole as far as how those are going to be maintained within that management system. If they just say, you know, no, those independent operators, they're on their own, we're not sure how they're going to do it, then we would be hesitant, of course, of even considering letting it on the list, just because of the very fact that they're unwilling to manage it. I think there are some that are saying that, I got one proposal I remember where they're just saying that, you know, those won't be booked at all. And so we're kind of have to push back and say, well, you have to demonstrate to us how they're not going to be booked, because we can see their advertisements online right now. So that's just the management of it.
This is Donna, Karen, and everybody. I tuned in late, but I mean, I heard the mayor say last week to the Chamber of Commerce that only 2 resorts are in the process of being resort bubbles, and they're Timbers and Kukuyula. So I don't think there are very many outside managed property, maybe Kukuyula, but I think Timbers, I can't think of anybody else who's there. So it's a very limited question, I think. And it seems like the individual management company would be responsible.
Yeah, thanks for that, Donna. And I think we're kind of bifurcating 2 issues here. It was one question earlier was, you know, how does a vacation rental condo hotel get on the list of places that somebody can quarantine, right? And that's just being on the quarantine list as a hotel motel. So and how that's managed overall as a site that's gonna drive whether or not it's put on that list. The second issue is with the so-called resort bubble, how many of the resorts or sites might actually opt into that system? And that also, and I think that might be confusing. There's 2 on that list right now, and there's 2 on this other list, but it's kind of 2 separate issues.
Well, hopefully very soon, you know, we'll have adequate and reliable testing, so it'll be a moot question.
Yep.
Ina, it's Marty. I guess I'd like to just ask kind of a specific, try to put an example into a specific resort. So let's just take Plantation Holly, for instance. Plantation Holly has a front desk. Half of the units are owned, self-managed, either by owners or by property managers, and the other half are managed by the front desk. So are you guys saying that if Plantation Holly were to put in a proposal to be one of the areas that guests could quarantine, you're going to expect Plantation Holly to cooperate with the individually managed units in order for them to qualify as a whole? You know what I'm saying? Because even though they're managed, even though some units are self-managed or managed by property managers, we are required to use the front desk. All our guests have to check in at the front desk. You have to get a key there, you know, so there is some degree of security. Although I'm sure OLS, who's the management company of Plantation Holly, might disagree that they don't want to manage our guests, the guests of the self-managed units. So are you guys going to kind of, if you approve a condo complex such as Plantation Holly, where they do have a front desk and it has a mix of management style, right? There's a hotel management company and there's also individual management company. Are you going to try to make them agree that all of it has to be managed the same way? In other words, the front desk has to manage all guests? I hope that makes sense. You know what I mean?
No,
like,
yeah.
we just don't want
it
them
does.
to ice us out. We don't want them to, we don't want OLS to be able to quarantine guests in their units only. And then the rest of us who self-manage are out for quarantine, sort of.
No, and yeah, that's kind of to my point is that, right, we don't have the manpower to be able to individually check on these units and
Right.
the management company. So, you know, if Plantation Holly, say, was even let on the list, then Plantation Holly as a whole has to be in compliance with the various checks and requirements. It
Okay.
can't be, these guys are not being monitored and these guys are.
Right, okay.
Because once you're on that list, the airport screening team has to be able to look at the list and go, okay, boom, all of Plantation Holly is good. You're staying there, you're good to go.
Yeah, okay.
So
That was what
and I also say, you know, because like I said earlier, we are reviewing the proposals, but we also have to kind of get back to the earlier point of compliance. We also have to ensure that it's done within the confines of the governor's proclamation and rules on vacation rentals.
right. And does it almost always boil down to a front desk and or security?
It's to a certain degree, as far as implementation and enforcement, yes. There's other legal issues as far as whether or not we can classify it legally as a resort.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions right now?
Karen, it's Marty again. I guess I think from the TVR committee's perspective, I know we were all kind of hoping that when the VQ is lifted for by whatever standard, you know, pre-testing, yada, yada, will TVRs be allowed to be rented? It sounds like from Elton that they would be if the pre-travel testing was implemented across the board. If you come over clean, technically you could go to a vacation rental. Is that correct? With limitation potentially, right? Like we're not going to go out booking right now, but it sounds like that's on its way. Is that fair to assume?
So if you look at the, oh, Matt, you want to go?
So the governor's proclamation, right? The specific wording is people who are subject to, I'm not reading it, but it's memory, so not specific, I guess. But if you have to pay for commercial lodging, you have to stay at a hotel or motel. That's what the governor's proclamation says, if you're subject to the quarantine, right? So if you pre-tested, as the governor's latest proclamation, the 13th, which allows pre-test. So if you pre-test and you test negative, you wouldn't be subject to the quarantine, which means you wouldn't be subject to that limitation on hotel and motel. So, I mean, that is correct. If you pre-test out currently under what is currently out there, there is the potential for being able to stay at a TVR. But just to kind of not expand, but emphasize, as Elton already said, probably not the best idea to start booking now. There are other rules that are currently in the works that may impact that. They're currently being reviewed by the Attorney General's office. So there are other potential limitations that may be coming.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for all of that. That helps clarify it. Do you guys have any idea when, I know this is the million-dollar question, do you have any idea when the governor may announce these additional limitations?
You know, I would expect and kind of hope by the end of the week. You know, at this point, it's with the Attorney General's office, right? And so legal review can take some time. They've probably had it for a little while now, but I would expect that I'll hear back from them at some point within the next few days, and then hopefully by the end of the week. But can't really commit to anything because it's
Yeah,
not actually
of course.
in our court. But
Of course. And technically right now, correct me if I'm wrong, even at October 15th, people still have to quarantine going to the outer islands. Is that correct? This proclamation only applies to pre-testing going to Oahu. Is that correct?
The pre-testing only applies to Trans-Pacific. So only people who are coming from off the islands. Inner island, you're correct. Anybody traveling inner island, the quarantine still applies. It doesn't apply when you're going to Oahu, but anytime anyone was coming to us, there would be a quarantine for inner island travel. So it really would just apply to Trans-Pacific.
So if I get a 72-hour test, I can't go to Honolulu for the weekend and back without quarantining on Kauai when I get back.
As under the governor's proclamation, that's correct. That's also something that's also in the works that might change within the next. We do have a proposal that might change that, but as it under the governor's proclamation, which is currently released, that's correct.
The biggest complaint I get is that Hawaii residents are being discriminated against, where incoming travelers are allowed to come without quarantine, but Hawaii residents are still subject to that unfairly. You might want to pass that up to the governor.
I think the governor, and this is just really me talking with some of the attorneys from the state, but they were trying to give the neighbor islands some control over that. So I think all the neighbor islands will be dealing with that in some way or another. And I guess we have a couple weeks to figure it out with October 15th kind of quickly approaching. But understood. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Could you just elaborate, just so I'm super clear? So inner island versus Trans-Pacific, are you saying that when Trans-Pacific travelers just say they're coming from California and they want to come to Kauai, but they stop in Honolulu for a day or for a layover, they're still allowed to come to Kauai without quarantining? Or they stop on Oahu without quarantine, but if they travel onto another island, they have to quarantine? Could you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah,
I understand the inner island travel one, but the Trans-Pacific, are they allowed to go from Denver or California or Oregon to Kauai with a pre-done test?
So under the governor's proclamation, and it is kind of confusing, because the inter island quarantine is still in effect, you really can't island hop. So if someone was coming from Denver, stopped in Honolulu for a day, they would not be able to come here without being subject to the 14-day quarantine. So it really only works if you're traveling to one island. Or the other option would be they could travel here first and then go to Oahu, because there isn't the 14-day quarantine when they hit, and they could, so you could only island hop one direction.
I see.
And then that's
So
just
is that quarantine waived if there's just a layover in the airport? So Colorado to Honolulu to Kauai, all in one leg, right? They didn't leave the airport or anything. Are they subject to quarantine on Kauai?
If they pre-test out, no.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to be real clear on that because it was a little bit confusing. It sounds to be that everybody can go to Oahu, but as soon as you want to move on, you have to quarantine. So now I really see what Mike is saying, where it feels discriminatory against locals because we can't come back to our own island, yet visitors can, as long as they're on a quote unquote direct flight. Direct flight sometimes is still considered stopping in Oahu, right? You can book a quote unquote direct flight and you just stop over on Oahu. Sometimes you don't get off the plane. They continue on. So just wanted our TVR, the people who are on the call that are TVR people, wanted them to be very clear. It's hard for us to get, there's a lot of misinformation being circled around, mainly by people who don't stay up on meetings like this. So we really are thankful that you guys help educate us, because it's not only, it's confusing, even to people who are educated and in the business legitimately. So we really thank you guys for that. If anybody else has any comments. Lucy, are you on the call? You have something to say?
So Karen, I can add just a little bit to that. You know how Matt said we hope to hear something by the end of the week. There's pretty much a deadline or line in the sand for the 15th, where the governor said certain things are going to take place. So definitely we'll hear more by then. So things are in the works possibly. If they get approved, then we might be able to address some of these areas of concern. I mean, but there are even questions that we need to work out where I know counties have asked AG's office, say if we just take that 72-hour pre-flight testing requirement, what if they don't get their test results yet and they arrive in state? Can they go to their TVR that they booked? We don't have a definitive answer on that, but if you go by the letter of the emergency proc, those with subject to quarantine would not be able to stay in the TVR. So they'd have to go to a hotel until they got their test results, for example. But all that kind of stuff has to be worked out. But I'm, pretty confident that they will have to do it prior to the 15th because airports, county screening, state screening, everybody has to be ready by then. So, there's been some criticism that, kind of short notice and how this thing's going to take shape. But at least on Kauai, we've always found a way to make it work, even if it means developing our own system for, say, airport verification of traveler status to determine whether or not they can rent a car, setting up the checkpoints at airport baggage claim just before. That has become the model for the rest of the state, at least the neighbor island counties, to follow when they re-implemented the inter-island quarantine, etc.
There was one more question that came up in our committee meeting, and that was on the pre-testing. Okay, so the adults can get pre-tested, children cannot. So what happens in that situation? I mean, technically they would have to quarantine.
So I don't see where that idea of children cannot be tested comes from, but from what we see in the 13th proc, it says all persons. So I need to check with our subject matter experts on the public health side, but my understanding is that the type of tests that they're looking at are not the really deep nasal swab. It's a shallow swab, and even children could do it. But I'd have to defer to health on that. But yeah, I am not aware of non-testing of minors.
Okay, is there any other questions from our members? And
I have another question, Karen, just to shift gears.
Go ahead, Marty.
A tiny bit, just a shift of gears a tiny bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about the 6-month rental, 6-month leases in TVR properties. Is that still okay? I'm getting conflicting information. I have a couple of different contractors that are coming in and we write them a 6-month lease. I have a feeling they're being denied because they are being told they have to quarantine in a hotel because they want exemptions to fly back and forth to Oahu every weekend. But I just wanted to confirm with you guys, if I have a legitimate 6-month person coming in, we've got a bunch of Princeville houses that were RTVRs that have temporarily converted to long-term legitimately. And I've got somebody coming in on Wednesday. I just want to make sure with his 6-month lease, they can get through the airport. Okay. That's still the case, China?
Yeah, Marty, that it is. You can
Okay.
You can convert a TVR into a 6-month lease, and they can stay there. They're gonna have to quarantine there, of course, for the first 15 days.
Right.
But now that will constitute a residence. The confusion, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The confusion that's happened is that a fair amount of contractors have executed 6-month leases in TVRs, and that we have to kind of put our foot down and say, no, not anymore, guys. If you want an exemption for your employees to continuously go to the job site and have a modified quarantine request, and then continue to fly back home on the weekends, they're gonna have to stay in a hotel and motel.
Okay.
Just because we were having teams, some contractor teams circle, 7, 8, 9, 10 employees at any given time through these TVRs, or through their 6-month leases. And then they're going out and working with the teams, and that became a very serious, incredible public health concern.
Right.
And even because I mean, while much of the economy is broken, in particular in the TVR and hotel resort industry, from the construction side, the economy is booming.
Right.
Contractors are telling us they haven't been this busy in 10 years. We've been really trying to push, knowing that could be a definite area we can prop the economy up. But it's going so much now that even some of the unions are telling us, yeah, we can't fill the labor positions. And so there was one Monday where 179 inter-island travelers flew in. 152 of them were construction workers on modified quarantine exemptions.
Wow.
So we're glad for the engine booming there, but we had to a little bit put our foot down on where some of these guys are staying, essentially.
Yeah.
But to be clear, outside of those guys getting modified quarantine exemptions approved so that they can go to their job sites, anybody else coming here as a resident, wanting to stay in the TVR with a 6-month lease, they'll make it through the airport screening.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I ask a question of you folks?
Sure.
So the counties were given statewide presentation put together by some UH professor. And one thing that related to your industry that stood out was it looked like real estate sales were down statewide, as were property values. I don't know if it was associated with those sales. With the exception, most notably of Kauai, that was up like almost 17%. Is that what you folks are seeing?
Can someone answer the question on sales?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not feeling that, and if anybody else is on sales in this call, please chime in, but I am seeing that we don't have a real lull in sales. Quite the opposite is happening, is that everybody wants to be here, and people, especially on the high end, are buying stuff sight unseen. They don't even care. They just want to get here. They'll figure it out later. Something's wrong with the house, they'll deal with it. That's kind of refreshing in a small sense, because they're not so picky. They got bigger fish to fry. Getting out of their cities is the biggest motivator. I don't see that trend as much in the local market. People are not buying sight unseen, under 800, under $1 million. They're not buying sight unseen. They're a little bit more, if you can imagine big high-end homes, they've got disposable income, and they've got, they're lawyered up. So if anything goes wrong, they're quick to sue. I hate to say that on this meeting, but it's true. And as opposed to the under $1 million niche, it's people who work really hard and they don't have a lot of money. They're putting everything into their properties. So those properties are particularly selling to locals only, and they're not doing sight unseen. They have the ability to go around. So I'm not seeing a huge drawback, at least not on Kauai. The gap still exists, right? There's the low end and then there's the super high end that still continues to plug along. We don't have a lot of sales in the mid range, which is still the same. It's always been, that's been that way for 10, 15 years already. Donna, you're a broker with lots of sales. You want to chime in there?
Yeah, I will chime in. I pretty much agree with that, but I would just say it's not that the high end don't care. I think it's going to be a new norm of people buying sight unseen. We saw a little bit of it before, but I mean, now when you take a listing, you have to do a video or a virtual tour, and so they've got that. You do a live FaceTime walkthrough. They do thorough inspections with inspectors, engineers. So they do their due diligence, but they are buying sight unseen, and I think it's a trend that we're going to see stay. But yeah, we are seeing a trend of people moving here to live, because they're working from home. Their kids are getting schooled online. They can live anywhere in the world. But it's not only here. We're seeing that. I mean, I'm here in California, and all over the mainland is actually booming. For the same reason, people are moving out of the inner cities to the suburbs.
And just to clarify, when I said high end, I didn't mean they didn't care. I just mean that they have resources. it seems to be the mentality is a little different. That the sight unseen is not as scary. Buying sight unseen is not as scary as it is to a local person who's got just pennies to make the deal happen. Just clarifying there. I'm not being mean to high-end people. They help our economy too. Anybody else have any comments on that? Does that kind of match up what you were hearing, Elton?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of validate what that study was showing, as well as what I think Kaina folks are seeing at the airport, where we're getting a lot of people come in and they're saying they are intended residents. So.
Yeah, and Marty, I guess your comments are somewhat, relieving for us, and we hope that the trend kind of stays there, because, putting our planning and housing hat on, we thought that the silver lining of, possibly living in a pandemic is the housing crisis could chip a little bit away at that. And now we're not seeing that at all, right? We're seeing extremely low mortgage rates, a reason to flee the mainland and come here. And now the global ability to telework. And so we're seeing a lot of people coming in with rental agreements, and that's fine and dandy. But if, they're purchasing out the local market, it's just a whole nother level of pressure we're gonna have to deal with, or need to deal with, in addressing our housing crisis. But from what it sounds like, Marty and Donna, is for, at least for the purchases, most of what you guys are seeing is above the 800,000 range and more aimed at the.
It's probably even higher than that. Yeah, it does. I'm not seeing it affect tremendously the regular person's real estate market. We still have a lot.
But this is Kahe. I was going to speak on the rental. So what we thought what might happen with, a lot of TVR sitting empty would open up the rental market. It did open it up, but the rental rates have gone up. The trend now is 7, 8, 10, 15,000 a month. And so it hasn't helped us with our local housing. It's only attracted, more from the mainland to come over. And we are being dictated by our homeowners that are, telling us where they want it to be priced at and what they need it to be priced at. And so now we have this situation where the homes that used to provide jobs are no longer jobs, because they're turning into long-term rentals. And now those locals no longer have those jobs. The locals also don't have the homes. So it's, I don't know what the solution is, but it hasn't helped. And yeah, in Kilauea, where I live, the homes are now on the market. Middle of Kilauea, $850. Total fixer-uppers, $850. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think a few weeks ago, MSN listed the top 10 rural places in America to run away from COVID to. Kopaa was number 9, I think, on the list.
That was mostly local market.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I see more and more families, like in Puhi, there's more families that are living together now. So it's like, I don't know what's happening to the homes that they lived in, but it's like now individual families are kind of growing into like a community that lives in a house. And I'm seeing more and more of this happening, like I said, in Puhi. And I know like probably it's happening other places as well, where a lot of these people were hotel workers. And now because, lack of income and resources, they're just stacking up into one house. I mean, I don't know where they lived before.
Yeah, and I can only speak somewhat, just, without citing any official studies, but we're looking at, but just colloquially that, either you have the college kids who are supposed to leave for college, or were at college are now coming back home. And then, yeah, indeed, those in the tourist economy that just don't have the jobs and ability to stay where they were in their own, say it was a rental, not have to go back to mom and dad. We're definitely seeing that. I think there's been a lot of conversation with us and the construction industry about the lack of labor to meet all of the construction jobs going on. And, talking even like the Carpenters Union, they have 20 some odd seats available. at the low level that they're having to recruit from Oahu on. And so it kind of is that question of how do you pivot some of the unemployed resort, hotel, tourist workers into the construction industry. And then, like I said, it's not highly specialized jobs per se. They can start at the ground level and start with fairly substantial pay. And it's just trying to get them to pivot that way.
I'd like to say something about that as well. I recognize that a lot of new businesses are popping up because of COVID. You know, all of a sudden we've got delivery, food delivery. We never had food delivery before. I used to scratch my head. How come nobody can deliver my sushi? Anyway, now, so people are being kind of creative. I think, and this is not I'm not making a testimonial one way or the other. I just think it's I think it's great to see people's ingenuity into creating something good out of crisis. It's probably going to be a shift on the way things are done moving forward. You know, I would say that a lot of people in tourist specific businesses are going to start to think differently about how they make their money, right? No longer is this 100% income from tourism going to be a safe bet. So I think it's great that some of this is going to promote local businesses. Like in the beginning, everybody was freaking out that there was big vacant spaces and places are closing and oh my God, it's a crisis. And the next thing you know, they're getting filled with Hanapa fishing store. And, you know, there's local businesses specific to local people that are opening up. I think it's actually refreshing. I mean, they're taking a big chance, right? Starting business in the middle of a pandemic, but I mean, kudos to them. I think it's going to be a little bit better on the backside, that maybe our balance between tourism and locals will be better as far as how locals make money.
Okay, are there any last minute questions for all three gentlemen? Because we promised Elton that it would be an hour at the most. And he's a busy man too, so.
4 minutes. We got 4 minutes left. Karen, you wrap it up.
No, but what I was going to offer is that if there's anything that you have concerning real estate, TVRs, anything in housing itself that you guys need questions to, we have the experts and their license is on the line, as I mentioned earlier. So like Matt, that has to go with the Bar Association, real estate agents are tied to the real estate license. So just a suggestion, we're offering our services, and anytime you need anything, feel free to call. Anybody else last minute questions? Elton, Kaina, Matt?
No questions, but thank you very much for that offer and for putting this together. And I'll make sure to keep your contact information as a resource for our incident management team.
That would be great.
Karen, thank you very much, or Marty and Kahea, whoever organized this. It was excellent. Elton and Matt and Kaina, thank you very much for your time. It was a good talk story session.
Yep. And then, again, initially before everyone got on the call, Karen had asked about that resource if you have questions. And I talked about our COVID-19 website, kauai.gov/COVID-19. Our call takers will probably hate me because they get thousands of calls every day, but KEMA's phone number is 241-1800. And we do have call takers who try their best to answer questions or to provide the resource for possible answers. And then things that they don't know, it gets bumped up to supervisory staff. And eventually sometimes to Kaina, Matt, or myself. So feel free to.
I got Kaina's number. Now I need yours.
You look at my email. It's right there, all in the auto signature. So.
No, the one I can call after hours.
That's there too. My 24/7 cell. So.
Thanks for all your hard work. We know you're in a really big positions in a really crazy world. So thanks for your guys' hard work. You are appreciated, and we look up to you guys for guidance. We'd like to partner up with anything you guys need. Please let Karen know or our committee know. We're happy to contribute. We don't want to go up against you. We're not trying to buck the trend. We just want to understand it so we can support you guys and we can inform our clients and our guests properly. And we're the ones that are licensed. We're doing it the right way. So we hope that you guys will eventually, you know, identify the bad seeds from the good seeds, and maybe we can all get back to work in our industry. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Aloha.